Good evening. I welcome you to this series of lectures on India's economy under Rapid Revision Series. In today's lecture, the topic which I have picked up for discussion is inflation. Let me first explain to you why this topic is important from the examination point of view. As you may be aware that the inflation is rising all over the world, means the global inflation is taking place. Almost all the countries are affected by rising prices, including India. And because of rising prices, most of the central banks of the countries they are adopting the tight monetary policy. Particularly the American Federal Reserve Bank and the European banks, they have adopted the most tight monetary policies. As a result, the interest rate in these economy has increased. Dollar has become very strong. As a result, capital is started flighting from the emerging economies to these developed economies because they find the safe haven of investment in these economies. As a result, the currency in the developing countries or emerging economies comes under pressure and it started depreciating. When currencies start depreciating, it affected the current account deficit and exchange rate become highly unstable. And therefore, to stabilize the exchange rate, most of the central bank, particularly I'm talking about India, they enter into exchange market, sell the dollar to stabilize the value of rupee. As a result, the foreign exchange reserves also started depleting. Therefore, the rise in inflation ultimately lead to increase in interest rate all over the world, and it is likely to impact the investment and growth in the forthcoming year. It has been projected that the world economy will grow only at 2.7% in 23-24 as compared to 3.2% rate of growth of the previous year, that is 22-23. When world growth is falling, the trade is also likely to fall. If trade is also likely to fall, in most of the cases, the balance of payment will be affected. And therefore, what I mean to say that the whole macroeconomic instability environment is likely to be created if inflation continues to rise. And if inflation persistently rising, then it affects the purchasing power of money. It also pushes the rate of interest, as I mentioned. It reduces the purchasing power of the people. It reduces the rate of savings. It leads to depreciation of the currency. Imports become more costlier. And as a result, the current account deficit widens. Therefore, the whole macroeconomic environment is likely to become unstable if the prices consistently rises in an economy. And this has been happened in the last 1 year or 1.5 years. That's why this topic has become important from the civil service examination point of view. Any question may be framed relating to the concept of inflation or the trends of inflation or the measurement of the inflation or the steps initiated by various governments, especially the government of India, to control the inflation. Keeping all these facts in view, it was decided to pick up this topic for discussion under a rapid revision series. And therefore, today I'll discuss it in detail, right from the beginning. How do you define the inflation? How do you measure the inflation? What has been the trends in inflation recently? What are the reasons for rising prices in the recent period? What has been the fundamental reasons for rising prices? And what measures have been initiated, particularly by the Reserve Bank of India or Government of India to contain the inflation? And what is the policy framework we have in India to control the inflation? All these issues will be discussed in today's lectures. And I hope that the information you will be getting from this lecture will be helpful in responding to most of the questions relating to inflation in India, particularly in case of India. Keeping this background in view, I go further and start from the beginning. How do you define the inflation? Is every rise in prices called inflation? No. The inflation is defined as the substantial and sustained increase in the price of goods and services over a period of time. Here, two words are important: substantial and sustained. Sustained means persistent increase in prices. If prices continue to rise persistently, it is normally called inflation. But if prices are rising at 1%, 2% per annum, do we call it inflation? No. It has to be substantial. It has to be substantial. And substantial is different for the different economies. It is not a common rate of inflation which may be substantial for us, may not be substantial for America. So therefore, the word substantial may have to be qualified. For example, in case of India, we have given the target to Reserve Bank of India to maintain the inflation 4 plus minus 2. It means 4% rate of growth in inflation in prices is considered to be reasonable as far as we are concerned. If price increase is more than 4%, only then it will be considered as substantial. And if more than 4% increase in prices, consistently increasing week after week, month after month, or maybe year after year, then it will be termed as inflation. Therefore, the inflation is substantial and sustained increase in the price of goods and services over a period of time. This is how we define the inflation. And when inflation sets in, all economic stakeholders, including consumers, including producers, including factors of production, they all start making their expectations about the prices in future. If we are living in the inflationary spiral stage, then obviously we keep expecting that the inflation is continuing to rise in future. And therefore, if we have the positive expectations for rise in price in future, price will have to rise in future. And therefore, not only the current rate of increase in prices, but the expectations about the prices also influences the rise in prices at some future date. And that's why the important reason for studying this topic is very, very important, because if inflation changes, all macro variables in the economy get disturbed. And if inflation is allowed to continue for a longer period of time, it might lead to instability in the economy. That's why it is necessary to understand the concept of inflation. How do we measure inflation, particularly in case of India, and what are the factors leading to increase in prices at a particular point of time, and what measures we are taking to contain this inflation. Normally, we classify the inflation in various terms. In newspaper, you will be reading these terms are being used. Some adjectives are used before the term inflation. Creeping inflation. If the rate of increase in prices is 3% or less, normally we call it a creeping inflation. As I said, in our case, the 4% is considered to be the creeping inflation. The rate of increase in prices up to 4% is considered to be necessary for economic growth, is necessary for the momentum of economic growth. But if the prices rises more than the 4%, then it start retarding the economic growth. So therefore, the increase in prices up to a certain level is essential or inevitable for maintaining the high growth rate in the economy. And that rate of inflation is called creeping inflation. Walking inflation is if inflation crosses your creeping rate of inflation and reaches up to 10%, then it is a walking inflation. It is a warning signal for the economy that the prices are going to rise in future and necessary steps may be taken to control the inflation. And if inflation rises more than 10% per unit of time, whatever unit we are taking, month or year, then it is called galloping inflation. And hyperinflation is the stage where the inflation is rising at a very high speed. That is, rate of inflation maybe 50% per month or 50% per week. And we have observed in many of the Latin American countries, they have experienced the huge rate of inflation. We have given one example here. In 2018, the Venezuela experienced the rate of inflation which was 13,000%. This kind of inflation is called hyperinflation. Therefore, the inflation is normally used in various contexts, and the rate of inflation at which the prices are rising is actually classified what kind of inflation we are talking about. Sometimes we also classify the inflation in terms of the headline inflation or core inflation. And normally, this kind of definition we are using in our case. And core inflation is if we measure the inflation except in case of food inflation and energy inflation. That is called core inflation. We exclude the rise in prices in food and energy, and what remains is called core inflation. If the inflation is rising due to increase in the price of the assets, then is the asset inflation. A unofficial term is sometimes used that is called shrinkflation, meaning thereby that if price is rising, then the content of the package is becoming smaller and smaller. In a competitive market, the producers are not able to change the prices, but they can definitely change the package of the goods and services provided against the rise in prices. They reduce the quantity or quality of the goods in the package which they supply in case of the inflation is there. So therefore, the inflation can be used in various ways. Depending upon the cause of inflation, major cause of inflation, the inflation is also classified sometimes as demand pull and cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when the price of goods and services rises mainly on account of the increase in demand vis-a-vis increase in supply. Vis-a-vis increase in supply. If demand is rising faster than the increase in supply, the inflation may occur. And if inflation has occurred mainly because of increase in demand, this is called demand pull inflation. If demand has not changed, but the cost of factors of production and cost of critical inputs have increased, then the cost of the production will rise, and that will enter into the prices. And the increase in prices on account of increase in the cost of production is called cost push inflation. Is called cost push inflation. Sometimes we take into account only the wages. Suppose the inflation is already set in, and workers find that they are not able to meet their needs with the given rate of wages, and they start demanding the more money wage rate. And if money wage rate rises, then obviously wage rate rise. It will push up the cost of production and and thereby the prices. And if the prices rise only because of increase in the wage rate, it is called wage inflation. But sometimes it is observed that on the one hand the prices are rising, but on the other hand economy is entering into stagnation phase. Economic growth remains almost stable or stagnant while the prices keep rising. Such situation is called the stagflation. Such situation is called stagflation. And this situation has happened first time in 1970s, when for the first time the oil price shock was announced. 1973, when the first oil shock was announced, then the prices started rising all over, and but growth became stagnant. And therefore many of the countries, including developed countries, they face the situation of stagflation. The stagflation is a situation when the price start rising but growth remains stagnant. Therefore, given this definitional part, now we come to the case of India and how this inflation is measured. As I said, that inflations are always measured in terms of the rate of change in prices. And normally we measure the rate of change in prices in terms of index numbers. In terms of index numbers, we have to calculate the index numbers of prices. And to calculate the index number of prices, we have to define some base year. That is from which year we are measuring the increase in prices in the current year. And once the base year is defined and the current year is defined, then we define the basket of commodities for which the change in prices is to be measured. Then we measure the price of each commodity, assign the weight if necessary, and then total them. And then we find the average increase in prices in the current year of the basket minus the average prices of the same basket in the base year, and divided by the base year prices multiplied by 100. This will give you the inflation, rate of inflation. This is how we measure the inflation in India. This is how we measure the inflation in India. This method is called the index number method, price index numbers. We always calculate the price index numbers over the base year. Base year is necessary to define because the change in prices are measured over the base year. And keeping this methodology in view, three kinds of price indices are required to be estimated or are being estimated in India. At the consumer level, we measure the consumer price index. At the wholesale level, we measure the wholesale price index. And recently, a committee of the government suggested to also estimate the producer's price index at the producer level. And these three indices are to be computed as far as India is concerned. Consumer level means the price which consumer is actually paying in the market for buying a particular product. And producer price index is the price which producer is receiving of that product actually. and wholesale price is obviously at the in the wholesale market, and therefore these three types of indices are being computed. In case of India, most popular are CPIs and WPI. CPI and WPI. The producer price index, of course, is recommended for computation, but so far we have not started publishing the producer price index so far. And therefore, we are only confining ourselves to consumer price index and the wholesale price index. As I mentioned, that the consumer price index is the prices which the consumers are paying directly at the retail level. When you go to the market, when you buy something in the market and you pay some price for the product, that is the retail price. And what you actually pay today and what you actually used to pay, say in the base year 10 years back or 5 years back, the difference between the two is the change in prices of that particular product. And this is how we measure the rate of change in prices over a period of time. Normally, the consumer price index is divided into the 8 categories of the items, that is education, communication, transportation, recreation, clothes, the foods and beverages, housing and medical care. Under of these items, we collect the prices. We collect the prices and we collect the prices of the 448 items in rural areas and 460 items in the urban areas. Because CPI is computed separately for the urban area and separately for the rural areas, and therefore the basket is slightly different. For rural areas, basket is 448 items. Urban areas basket is slightly more, 460 items. And when we collect the prices from various markets, we find that for collecting the prices for rural areas, we select 1,181 villages, markets, covering all the districts of the country. And while selecting the markets, we take care that at least 2 villages are selected in each district of the country. And 1,114 urban markets are selected from 310 selected towns of urban areas. 310 selected towns of the urban areas. While selecting the towns, we ensure that all the state capitals are selected. The towns we pick up is based on the definition where the population is 9 lakhs or more. All the towns which have the population of 9 lakhs and more, plus the all state capitals, if they are not covered under 9 lakh criteria, the state capitals are necessarily covered. So therefore, the number of items we have to collect and the number of number of points from where the prices are to be collected are clearly defined in the methodology of CPI. And CPI is computed by the NSO, National Statistical Office, and they define very clearly the basket and the points from where the prices are to be collected. And for each, they defined the base year. The common base year for this series is 2011-12. But for certain kind of the CPI, we use the different base. For example, CPI for industrial workers. CPI for industrial workers is used for computing the dearness allowance for the government employees. And for this computation, we use the base 2016. So therefore, the base here, the common base is 2011-12. But for particular purpose, in some of the cases, we have shifted the base to have a recent change in prices. And in the 2015 series, we have made certain minor changes in the classification of goods, classification of goods which are to be included in the basket for computation of CPI, and all these are classified under these heads, and each category of goods are assigned the weight, weight given to the particular group of commodities indicates its importance, in the CPI. For example, the food and beverages, we are assigning the weight 45.86%. It means slightly less than half of the weight is given to the food and beverages items. Food items are given the highest weight. Secondly, the housing, the 10% weightage is given to the housing in the CPI. Fuel and light 6.84%, clothing and footwear 6.53%, and the intoxicants 2.38%. Miscellaneous goods 28%. Miscellaneous goods include so many items. You see that I have given a list of items just for your information. You don't have to mug up the list, but you have to just understand the list of items included under each category. Food and beverages, you see that the kind of items we have included. All these items are those which we daily consume, on day-to-day basis we consume to meet our food requirements, and the weightage given to them is indicated by the red, that is 45.86%. The highest weight is given to this item. Heavy weight is given to this item, is given to the food and beverages. This is the highest weight is given to them. Highest weight is given to this category. Similarly, the clothing and footwear, we are giving the weight of 6.53. Intoxicant, a small weight is given 2.38. Housing 10%, as I mentioned. Fuel and light 6.84%. You see miscellaneous. Under miscellaneous, we include the household goods and services which are not counted above. The expenditure done by the households on health, on education, on transportation, on recreation, or on personal care. All these are the miscellaneous expenditure. We classified under one head, that is miscellaneous. Of course, we collect the prices for all these items separately, but for the purpose of calculating the CPI, we club them together and call them miscellaneous. And therefore, under these, the heads, six heads, six groups, we classified the all prices collected. We we compute the change in prices after taking into account the weights assigned to them, and weights are assigned to them according to the consumption expenditure survey of 11-12 National Sample Survey Organization, which was named earlier. They conducted the consumption expenditure survey for 11-12 based on the expenditure done by the consumers on various commodities. The weights are calculated. Therefore, given these weights and given the prices collected from all the centers identified above, we calculate the price level in the current year. And for similar commodities, we already have the price level in the base year. And then we find out the change. Then we find out the change in prices. And that percentage change in prices is called the inflation. This is how we calculated the consumer price index. The consumer price index, as I said, indicates the change in prices which consumer actually paying in the retail market while buying the goods and services of their requirement. And when I'm saying change, this is change over the base year. So this will indicate the actual change in prices which consumer is paying in the retail market. But when we go to the wholesale price index is when the wholesalers immediately buys the product from the producer, and then they set the prices of the product. But when they buy from the producers, immediately after that, so many taxes are imposed. So many taxes are imposed. Today we call it a GST. GST is imposed. Then they incur some expenditure on the transportation. They incur some expenditure on the storage. Then they may be incurring some expenditure. This is called the the payment of the interest rate, etc. So therefore, all expenditure done by the wholesalers are added over and above the price at which they have bought the products from the wholesalers, and that is called the wholesale price index. And therefore, the wholesale price index, we include around 697 items while calculating the wholesale price index. And you always keep in view that the wholesale price index is not calculated by the National Statistical Office. The wholesale price index is calculated by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. They publishes the wholesale price index number, and base, as I said, the common base is 2011-12. But the basic drawback of the wholesale price index is it doesn't take into account the services, and services are playing important role in our day-to-day life. They do not take into account the prices of the services we consume. They also do not take into account the manufactured goods produced in the informal sector, and which constitute around 35% of the total goods produced. And therefore, the major chunk of goods and services which we consume on day-to-day basis, they are not taken into account in the wholesale price index. Wholesale price index. Therefore, the wholesale price index may not reflect the true change in the prices over a period of time. That's why the after 2014 we have decided to shift to consider CPI as the anchor of the inflation. Means the inflation will be reflected by change in CPI instead of WPI. Till 2014, RBI and in other government reports, we were using wholesale price index as the anchor of the inflation. And therefore, the situation has changed after 2014 when we have decided to monitor the CPI as the anchor of the inflation. If CPI is fluctuating or changing or rising, we may conclude about the change in prices, that is the inflation. Therefore, the wholesale price index, of course, we are computing today, and we are also making certain changes in WPI so that it has become a very close the close to the CPI. We are also calculating separately WPI food index, and we also calculate CPI food index. If we have both the indices, we can have a better understanding of the change in prices at various levels, and we can monitor the change, and we can also take correspondingly policy measure to control the prices if they are rising. So therefore, this main point here is you need to understand how the magnitude of inflation is estimated in case of India. And normally, as I said, CPI and WPI are the two anchors of inflation. Till 2014, WPI was used widely to represent the change in prices in India, that is inflation in India. But after 2014, its situation has been changed, and it was decided that CPI is the true anchor of the inflation. And therefore, we started measuring inflation in terms of change in consumer price index. When I am saying consumer price index, I mean combined consumer price index, that is both for rural and urban areas. But we also calculate separately for rural area, separately for urban area, and we also combine them to have the combined CPI. As I mentioned, that the producer's price index is actually recommended by a committee in the government, but the PPI estimates are not being published, not being brought out so far. That's why we are not considering this index now. We are only confined to the CPI and the WPI. As I mentioned that these are the two anchors of inflation, two anchors of inflation. And therefore, we started measuring the trends in these two indices. But these two indices, as I mentioned, are different because CPI indicates the change in prices at the retail level and WPI indicates change in price at the wholesale level. And between wholesale level and retail level, the so many things are added, and therefore these are the different. And we have to be very careful in using the CPI and WPI. Here I mentioned certain differences between the two. As I said that in WPI, we do not take into account services. We do not take into account the manufactured products by the informal sector, but both are included in the CPI. Weights assigned to various groups of commodities are different in CPI and different in WPI, and the basket is different. That's why the change in prices measured through WPI and CPI will be different. Will be different. That's why when we use these two price indices, we have to be very careful in using these CPI and WPI. You see that the difference, the recent in the last 2-3 years, you see the difference. The red one is the WPI and the blue one is the CPI. And CPI was around 4.8% in 2019-20, and it started slightly rising in the pandemic period because of drastic reduction in the supply side. Then it is slightly stabilized, but after 22, when the Russian-Ukraine conflict took place, the commodity prices in all over the world started rising, including India, and therefore the CPI started rising. CPI started rising. The WPI also started rising. You see that the increase in WPO is faster, is quite faster than the CPI because of the weights assigned to different commodities. And that's why we normally measure inflation in terms of the CPI combined. Of course, we keep measuring WPI also, which gives the indication of the change in prices, particularly in the organized sector, organized manufacturing sector. And therefore, we measure it for the comparison purpose and for many other policy purpose in a particular sector. But for measuring inflation as such, by definition, we use CPI combined today. But now the question is, before we enter into the reasons for change in prices in the recent years, let's go into some the theoretical foundation and what the theory says about change in prices. Once you understand the theory, you can easily understand the actual reason which are happening in the ground. You will be able to explain and appreciate that. For example, a group of economists called the monetarists, they say that the change in prices is always a monetary phenomenon. According to them, the change in money supply will always lead to change in prices. These the group of economists who assume that economy is in equilibrium, is always at the full employment level. They assume that whenever economy is in equilibrium, it is always at full employment level. Even at this stage, if money supply rises, the cash balances with all stakeholders rises, and they increases demand in the market. They places more demand in the market for various goods and services. But since economy is already at full employment, it cannot increase the supply to meet the increased demand. And if supply cannot increase, then obviously price will start rising. Price will start rising. And therefore, according to them, it is the money supply only which lead to change in prices. In this equation, they say that M is the money supply, V is the velocity of money, P is the price level, and T is the level of income or level of transactions. And they say that in the short run, the V is constant. V velocity of money is constant. The level of income is constant because we are already at full employment level. We are already at full employment level. And if V and T is constant, then increase in M will only lead to increase in P. Increase in P. This is what this theory says. This is what this theory says. The MV is equal to PT. This equation always hold according to them. And many of the inflation can be explained keeping this equation in view. When money supply rises, nothing else changes in the economy and prices start rising. And therefore, they assume that the inflation is purely a monetary phenomenon. It takes place only when the supply of money changes in the economy. And this is their approach. But the other school of thought says that economy is never reaches full employment, and the economy always in equilibrium at a point which is less than full employment. And as long as the demand is rising and supply is rising, the price will not rise. But once the supply reaches a point beyond which it cannot be increased, and if demand keep on rising, then the price starts rising. Only then prices start rising. So therefore, this school thought says that it is not always true that if M rises, P will rise. M rises, P may not rise because in response to increase in M, demand will rise, and in response to increase in demand, supply will rise. If economy is less than full employment, the price will rise only when supply do not rise commensurate to increase in demand. And that's why the Keynesian view came. The third, which is very relevant for developing countries, is the structuralist approach. They said that the developing countries or less developed countries, they have the structure in their economy such that the structural bottlenecks leads to increase in prices. Leads to increase in prices. For example, the shortage of infrastructure. If there is a shortage of infrastructure, then obviously for each infrastructure sector we will be having excess demand. For example, power is short in supply, but demand for power is rising consistently. If supply is not matching with the demand, then the price of power start rising in the market. Similarly for the roads, similarly for the other infrastructure facilities. So therefore, in these developing countries or less developed countries or in some of the emerging economies, it is the infrastructure bottlenecks which leads to increase in prices. Sometimes because of the obsolete technology they are using, they are having low productivity, and therefore output is low, which leads to the imbalance between demand and supply. Imbalance between demand and supply. Sometimes the inefficient distribution and storage facilities also lead to artificial shortages. You see that in most of the economies, see in case of India, in most of the cases, the wholesalers or traders, they store the commodities and create the artificial shortage in the market. And because of this artificial shortage, prices start rising. And when prices start rising, these traders releases the supply in the market to earn the more profit. These are certain structural problems in these economies. As I mentioned, cartelization of the producers. The various producers collude with each other and form the cartel. And the cartel maintain the supply in the economy such that their profit is rising. And therefore, these are the structural problems in these economies which led to increase in prices. Earlier cases we have seen these two theories are normally applicable in developed countries where the demand supply forces are allowed to work. But in the developing countries or less developed countries or in the emerging economies, the the structural issues are relevant for the change in prices. In our case, the imported inflation is more important. As and when crude oil prices rises in the international market, the price of the petrol and diesel rises in our economy. And when petrol and the diesel rises, obviously it has a wide cascading effect for other sectors, and overall price start rising. So therefore, these are some structural issues in these countries which led to the change in prices, which create the inflationary situation in the country. Therefore, we have a different reasons for increasing prices for the different countries. And in the recent change in prices, as I shown in the diagram, the recent surge in prices in 22 23 or starting from the April May 2022, the prices start rising and touches 7%, mainly because of the Russian Ukraine conflict led to increase in commodity prices all over, especially the prices of crude oil. And therefore our import of crude oil is up to 85% of our requirement. And if the imported crude oil prices increases significantly, it will lead to the number one impact will be the widening of the current account deficit. The second impact will be the increase in the diesel and petrol prices, because we immediately transfer the increase in international prices to the domestic prices. And the diesel and petrol being the critical input in most of the sector, particularly in transport. Therefore, the prices in various sectors started rising. A major cause of inflation is the imported inflation. Imported inflation. So therefore, the reasons in different countries may be explained in a different way. But I have discussed with you the general factors which normally lead to the increase in prices in the economies. And in our case, these structural factors are more important for the increase in prices in a particular sector. In a particular sector, it is not the monetarist view and Keynesian view always valid in case of the economies like ours. Maybe the combination of all the three may be observed to be leading to increase in prices. So therefore, the reasons may be different. I have listed certain reasons here. For example, when nothing has changes, the public spending has changed. So fiscal deficit of the government is continuously rising. When fiscal deficit rising, obviously it will lead to the increase in prices. Increase in prices. And the channel through which it will happen, I hope you are aware of that. I'm not discussing the channels through which it will affect the prices. But the government spending always leads to the increase in prices, because the government spending has a huge multiplier. And by the definition, the if fiscal deficit is more, the nominal income of the people rises. And nominal income of the people rises, demand rises. But corresponding to that demand, supply may not rise, which lead to inflation. Similarly, deficit financing, this is obviously nothing but the increase in money supply. If money supply doesn't change, only velocity has changed, even then the price may rise. Velocity means the number of times a particular note exchanges the hands in a given time period. If 100 rupee change the hands in 10 times, say within 1 month, then it will be counted 100 into 10 equivalent to 1000 rupees. If 100 rupee supply note doesn't change, but the velocity has changed from 10 to 20, then the 1000, this 100 rupee note will be equivalent to 2000 in that period. So therefore, even if the velocity has changed, the money supply will rise. So various reasons we can identify for increase in prices. Population growth, we are suffering from that. Population is still rising. When population is rising, the demand is rising, and therefore maybe that for some commodities we are not able to meet the supply, and the prices start rising. Hoarding, as I said, this is structural efficiency. Hoarding. We have a system where the artificial shortages are being created by the traders by making cartels in the market. Cartels in the market. There may appear a genuine shortage. For example, the widespread drought has occurred. Widespread drought has occurred, leading to the loss of production, particularly of food grains. In that particular year, the food grain production has declined, but demand persistently rising, and therefore this shortage of food grains may lead to increase in the food inflation. So therefore, the any reason could happen for increase in inflation. We have to identify at a particular point of time which reason is more important and significant to explain the change in prices. It's not a common reason, but ultimately it will boil down to aggregate demand, aggregate supply. But what factor has led to increase in aggregate demand, or has led to stagnation in supply side? You have to identify, and that is the actual reason of the change in prices. Therefore, change in prices I have listed many, but they are not relevant all the time for the same commodity. At different point of time, maybe the different factors are important. You see that this price rise in international market, this factor is important in the current year, because in the current year it is not because of domestic factor the price has increased. Largely this is the international price rise which led to increase in the price of the commodities, and therefore at the different point of time the different factors are important. We need to identify which factor is more responsible for increase in prices at a particular point of time. And this is how the questions are framed in the exam. They will give you so many reasons for increase in prices to make you more confused. They make them the bundled together, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you have to identify the at the present situation which factor is more important, and you see in which alternative that factors is there. That is the correct answer. Therefore, we are giving you the information about the change in prices. The If you look at the impact of the inflation, maybe that initially it is beneficial for the producers or entrepreneurs, but if persistently it rises, then it lead to even impacting adversely the producers. But in case of the consumers, the major issue is that the the fixed income group is actually the worst sufferer on account of inflation, because their income is fixed and price is rising. Therefore, their real income is falling, their purchasing power is falling, and therefore they are becoming more and more poorer on account of inflation unless their income also rises. So therefore, the most negative impact of the inflation is on reduction in the purchasing power of money. And this reduction in purchasing power of money is more severe, more harmful for those whose income is fixed, whose income is fixed. And therefore it may lead to the change in the income distribution over a period of time. Maybe that if inflation persistently rise, the income distribution changes in favor of profiteer class and may go against the other sections having the fixed level of income and wages. So therefore, the negative effects are listed here, but the major effect is those who are having the fixed income and fixed wages, they are much adversely affected by the increase in prices. Increase in prices. So therefore, the positive and negative effects are there, but negative effects are much more there than the positive effects. That's why you see that when we were discussing these definition, we saw that the 4% inflation in our case is considered to be creeping inflation, which is reasonable, which is necessary for maintaining the growth momentum. But if inflation rises beyond that, it becomes the more harmful. It will be deteriorating the economic position of various stakeholders, and that's why it become the severe concern for the authorities. That's why the negative effect of inflations are much more than the positive effects, and therefore, as soon as the inflation crosses the given limit, the government or the other authorities immediately swung into action to control the inflation. Besides that, one of the important relation which we normally observe in the economy is called Phillips curve. Phillips curve give you the relationship between a rate of inflation and rate of unemployment. Phillips is the name of the economist who observed the relationship between British economy for 100 years. And he found that there is an inverse relationship between a rate of inflation and rate of unemployment. Meaning thereby is that if rate of inflation is rising in the economy, it is profitable for the entrepreneurs to produce more, and therefore they deploy more workers, and rate of unemployment start falling because rate of employment is rising, and therefore we have a negative relationship between rate of inflation and rate of unemployment. But this relationship was broken down in 70s, when the inflation continues to rise, but the rate of growth and rate of employment was not rising at all. And that situation is called the stagflation. That situation is called the stagflation. This has happened in 1970s and persisted for the next 10-15 years. And therefore, this is a very severe situation when we are facing inflationary conditions, but the growth or employment is not taking place, and economy is passing through the stagflation phase. And therefore, these very important and serious policies have to be put in place by the government to break this impasse of the stagflation, meaning that increase in prices and stagnation in growth and employment. And that's why the flip curves give you an idea. Are we really falling in the phase of stagflation, or are we still facing the inverse relationship between rate of inflation and rate of unemployment? This sometime a question is set on this particular relationship also. That's why I have included this in this presentation, that you also have to remember that there is a inverse relationship between the rate of inflation and rate of unemployment as per the according to the Phillips curve. And Phillips is the name of economist Edward Phillips, who observed this relationship in British economy and make the law. But this law is not a universally true. It may happen in case of the capitalist market determined economies or market based economies. It may not happen in the structuralist economies where the structural factors are more important. Therefore, but we have to keep in view various nuances of the inflation. As I said, the negative impact, fall in real income, fixed income group is the worst sufferer. It reduces the purchasing power. It reduces the standard of living. It may increase the inequality of distribution of income. As I said, if prices continue to rise, normally income distribution favors the profiteer class. it turns in favoring the profited class and against the fixed income group, and therefore the income distribution becomes unequal. The various projects under implementation experience the cost overruns. Their cost overruns, they rises. In fact, the total cost required to complete the project rises on account of inflation. It may also lead to the speculative activities and the hoarding of necessary goods to earn more profit by keeping their prices high in the market. And therefore, the negative effects are more dangerous, harmful effect on the capital accumulation, because when prices are rising to maintain the same level of consumption, your savings falls. Consumption rises and saving falls. When saving falls, obviously, then your capital accumulation or investable funds falls. Investable funds fall. Therefore, the harmful effect is all over. The lenders lose more against the borrowers, because when you lend the money and when you get the money returned back to you, the value of money has changed if we are passing through inflation, and therefore lender loses and borrowers gains. Therefore, these are certain the the negative impacts of inflation in the economy. Since inflation has the more negative effects, therefore it is necessary to control the inflation. We cannot allow the inflation to rise, and therefore we have various policies at our disposal to control the inflation. We have a monetary policy at our disposal. We have a fiscal policy at our disposal. We have a sectoral policies at our disposal. If inflation is confined to a particular sector, we can take a policy measure for that particular sector only. So therefore, we have the various policy at our disposal to control the prices, and we have various instruments under each policy. For example, under monetary policy, we have to reduce the money supply. Monetary policy has basically the two purpose. If we are experiencing the inflation, they reduce the money supply and they reduce the credit supply in the market. And second is they increase the cost of the credit. Cost of the credit. The basic purpose of the such monetary policy is to reduce the demand for credit. Demand for credit will fall if the availability of credit is reduced by reducing the money supply in the economy. And the cost of credit can be changed if you raise the repo rate, if you change the bank rate or repo rate in the economy. And therefore, the monetary policy has only two, and the instrument they have at their disposal. They affect the two sides: availability of the credit and the cost of credit. All the instruments mentioned here, they affect these two things. That is availability of credit and the cost of credit. Reduction in high-powered money means reduction in the money supply. I hope you are aware of what is high-powered money and what is the money supply. And therefore, the when you reduce the high-powered money, it led to reduction in money supply given the money multiplier value. And therefore, the when we raise the interest rate, the cost of funds increases, and government, the RBI may also reduce the availability of fund by raising the CRR or by raising the SLR, that is cash reserve ratio or statutory liquidity ratio. They may also increase the margin money. They may also control the consumer credit control. They may not allow the credit for the consumption purpose. They may not allow the credit to buy the car. They may not allow the credit to buy any consumer durables. Therefore, the monetary policy, through monetary policy, the Reserve Bank of India may affect the availability of credit in the market and the cost of credit in the market, and both will lead to the reduction in the credit demand. Reduction in credit demand means the fall in the aggregate demand, and if the inflation is mainly on account of the increase in demand. We can reduce the demand through monetary measures. So therefore, monetary policy is one area. Second is the fiscal policy. Fiscal policy, you know that it consists of the government revenue and government expenditure. We have to maneuver the government expenditure and government revenue. If they are not equal, then it leads to the public the borrowings by the government. If the expenditure is more than the government revenue, obviously government has to borrow from the market. So therefore, if we are passing through the inflationary situation, the government has to control the fiscal deficit or revenue deficit. And therefore, to control the fiscal deficit, they have to keep the public expenditure under control. They have to reduce their market borrowings. They have to reduce their market borrowings. And besides that, the government may take the direct measures to control the prices. They may enter into direct control of prices. They may fix the prices of particular commodities so that the prices are not charged by the sellers beyond that. For example, in case of food grains, government may intervene in the market and set the price of the food grains. Nobody can charge the price beyond that price. The direct intervention of the government. Government may control the speculative and hoarding activities so that supply in the market may rise and therefore price may be controlled. Government may reduce the wage profit fees. Government may reduce the profit by imposing more taxes. So therefore, various measures are there where government can directly intervene and control the prices. But in our economy, you must be aware that the monetary policy has been more relevant in controlling the prices over a period of time. Over a period of time, if you look at the history of monetary policy in the past, we say that monetary policy has been subservient to fiscal policy till the 1998 or immediately after the economic reforms, we started changing the monetary policy. Till 1991, the monetary policy was subservient to fiscal policy. Means that whatever fiscal policy they dictate, the monetary policy or RBI has to do it. RBI has to do it. You know that in after independence in 1960s, the RBI monetary policy was aligned with the planned development process. We started with the planned development immediately after independence from second five-year plan onwards, and therefore we need a lot of resources to implement the development strategy, and therefore the government aligned the monetary policy with the fiscal policy. Means that if there is a deficit in the fiscal in the budget of the government, if there is a fiscal deficit, then the RBI has to use deficit financing or any other method to increase the money supply to meet the deficit, to fill the deficit gap. And it was essentially the policy in the beginning, and therefore monetary policy was not independent. In 1969, we nationalized the major banks, and when banks were nationalized, then banks were not allowed to use economic considerations in granting the credit. And in most of the sector, government implemented the policy of regulated credit. Government decided how much credit to be given to which sector, and this is the period when we implemented the priority sector lending policy, under which we decided there's so much the credit of the banking system will have to go to these priority sectors, and bank have no option but to give the credit as directed by the government, and therefore the regulated credit policy continued. It was only in mid 80s we started thinking to review the monetary policy, and we started liberalizing the monetary policy in 80s, but we did not liberalize it fully. Interest rate was still regulated by the government. but the phase continued. It was only after economic reforms we decided to change the monetary policy. And in 1998, government de-linked the fiscal deficit and monetary policy relationship, means that monetary policy will not go anymore in creating deficit financing for meeting the fiscal deficits. And therefore, these are two de-linked. And when the FRBM Act was enacted in 2003, it was formalized that the Reserve Bank of India will not create the deficit financing, will not increase the money supply just to meet the fiscal deficit of the government. The Act also said that RBI will not enter into the primary market or secondary market to buy the government securities, and therefore the subservience of monetary policy to fiscal policy was reduced to the minimum. Only in case of emergency, the short-term loans, which is called ways and means advances, can be given by the RBI to the government. But no more deficit financing, no more supply of the money by the RBI to meet the fiscal deficit requirement of the government. And from there onwards, we started having somewhat independent monetary policy. And independent monetary policy continued. And I'm just giving you the background to arrive at the current situation. In 2015, the government decided to give a additional target or a solely one target to RBI to maintain the price stability in the economy. And while maintaining the price stability, RBI has to keep in view the objective of the growth. And therefore, RBI Act 1934 was amended in May 2016. And in the amendment, a new clause is added that RBI is now responsible to maintain the price stability while keeping in mind the objectives of the growth. Earlier, RBI Act 1934 only says the RBI is responsible to regulate the issue of bank notes through reserve ratios and maintain the monetary stability. There was no direct responsibility of the RBI to control the prices or inflation in the economy. It was only after amendment of the RBI Act in 2016 a target is specified for RBI to achieve, and therefore in 2016 we enter into the phase of the inflation targeting. Inflation targeting has become the area we have entered into, means we have set the target of inflation to be maintained by the Reserve Bank of India, and we enter into the inflation targeting approach phase of the monetary policy in 2016 onwards. And that's why this phase has become very, very important. But to understand the nuances of the monetary policy, we need to understand the four terms. Four terms we have to understand. That is the goal set for the monetary policy. Goal set today is the price stability. That is, the RBI has to maintain the rate of inflation within the given range. And given range is 4 plus minus 2 percentage point. That is between 2% to 6%. That is the range given to the RBI. That is the inflation targeting approach. But given the goal, how the RBI or monetary policy will use its various instruments to control the prices, And therefore, even if the RBI changes repo rate, it immediately does not change the prices. Impact of repo rate has to be channeled through various route or channel of the through which the repo rate will impact the inflation has to be identified. And that's why the channel here is, once the goal is set, we have to define the instruments. Which instrument the RBI is going to use And instrument, given the instrument, we will find out that instrument, which indicator it will affect immediately, which indicator will be affected by a particular instrument. And then we will see that indicator, intermediate or target which the instrument will affect, the which operational target it will affect finally. And once these are to define, then we reach it to the goal. Goal is the inflation. Therefore, the monetary policy do not have any magic rod with which if they raise the interest rate today, tomorrow the inflation will be controlled. Therefore, the action of the monetary policy has to pass through various stages. And that's why we need to understand the functioning of the monetary policy framework in India. And this table gives you the framework that instruments are listed here. The repo rate, liquidity adjustment facility, open market operations, the marginal standing facility, market stabilization scheme, term repo, bank rate, etc. These are the instruments which are available at the disposal of the RBI. RBI may use any of these instruments, but as I said, after 2016, RBI has declared only one policy instrument, that is repo rate. They are using repo rate. Once the repo rate is changed, immediate target will be affected in the form of the monetary aggregates for short-term and long-term interest rate. They will be affected. They will finally affect the target, that is monetary base or the interest rate or bank credit. And once they are affected, it will affect the aggregate demand in the economy. And once aggregate demand is affected, they will affect the prices after some time. And this whole process is called the transmission mechanism of the monetary policy. So you need to understand the 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 framework of the monetary policy we have with the RBI, which is normally used by RBI to control the target inflation given to them by the government. Government signed the agreement with the RBI, and they have given the target 4 plus minus 2. That this is the range of inflation the RBI has to maintain, and RBI was free to use any of the instruments available at their disposal. But normally the experience indicates that they are using the repo rate, they are using policy rate. And what framework we have developed, I hope you are aware, but even at the cost of some repetition, I'll repeat it, how this has functioned. As just going back to the history says that the government set up a committee on the financial sector reforms. That committee on the financial sector reforms have recommended the government to give only one target to RBI for monitoring. Only one target to be given to RBI for monitoring. And committee suggested that the RBI may be asked to control the inflation in the economy. If inflation is controlled, then other variables can be controlled easily. And therefore, based on the recommendation of this committee on financial sector reforms, the government or RBI set up an expert committee to review and strengthen the monetary policy framework. And this committee made these suggestions to the government. The terms of reference to the committee was to review the objectives and conduct of the monetary policy, to review the organizational structure and the operation framework and instruments of monetary policy, to ensure compatibility with the macroeconomic and financial stability, and to identify the impediments in the transmission process and take necessary measures to remove them. And based on the report's recommendation, the government decided to give the inflation target to the RBI. and we enter into the phase of inflation targeting from 2016 onwards. As I said, that the question was what should be the anchor of the inflation. And after having a long discussion in the committee, expert committee, they came to the conclusion that CPI combined to be the nominal anchor of the inflation, means that inflation will be measured in the form of the consumer price index, and we have to monitor the CPI combined over a period of time to see whether the inflation is within the control or inflation is going beyond the control. And headline inflation is to be considered. Core inflation is not considered in India because core inflation is without the prices of energy and prices, energy and the food. And energy and food having more than 50% of weightage in the CPI. Therefore, it would be meaningless to have the core inflation as the anchor of the inflation because 50% of the commodities are not considered. That's why it was decided to have the headline inflation as the definition or target which to be monitored, and headline inflation to be measured in the form of the the inflation target, that is 4 plus minus 2, 4 plus minus 2, and this was the target given to the RBI. And it was also specified that if the RBI failed to maintain the inflation within the range of 2% and 6% for the 3 consecutive quarters continuously, then the RBI has to give in writing a note to the government reasons for the failure of not able to control the inflation within the given range. Therefore, the to what extent RBI will fail in controlling prices is also defined. That is 3 consecutive quarters, 9 months. If for 9 months the RBI is not able to control the inflation within the given range, the RBI will be considered to be failure in controlling the prices, and they have to indicate the reasons for this failure, and they have to suggest the government what can be done to control the prices. And therefore, the who will take the decision? The government has decided to went for the committee system. Earlier, the governor was the final authority. In the new framework, it is monetary policy committee which takes the decision for the monetary policy. And as I said, the major instrument of monetary policy today is the repo rate. Whether repo rate should rise or repo rate to be remain unchanged or repo rate to fall, the decision will be of the monetary policy committee. And monetary policy committee will go by majority. By majority. There are members there. Governor is ex officio chairperson, and one deputy governor in charge of monetary policy is also a member, and one officer of the bank to be nominated by the central board, and the 3 external members are appointed by the government. This is the composition of the monetary policy committee, and they have to take a decision by majority. If majority is not there, decision cannot be taken by the committee, and therefore the committee system was put in place. Target is put in place, and the RBI is given liberty to use the instruments available at their disposal to control the inflation. To control the inflation, but as I mentioned that RBI is using the repo rate as the instrument to control the inflation. Repo rate is also called the policy rate, and repo rate is the rate at which the RBI gives the loans to the banks to meet their financial requirement. We know that the RBI is a lender of the last resort. If any bank is facing the financial crisis, they can approach the RBI for the loan, and RBI may sanction the loan to that bank to meet its financial needs. but the rate at which the loan is sanctioned is the repo rate, and the loan given by the RBI to the banking system is secured loans. The bank has to mortgage the government securities or securities of the AAA corporate houses to be mortgaged with the RBI, and the loan given under this facility is from 1 to 28 days. The bank has to return this loan within the given period. Within the given period, and the limit the bank can raise the loan from the RBI is also fixed. And if that limit is crossed, then RBI charges the penalty rate of interest in the form of marginal standing facility rate, MSF rate. MSF rate. So therefore, once the repo rate is decided by the Monetary Policy Committee, the 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 width of the liquidity adjustment facility is automatically decided. I hope you are aware of the liquidity adjustment facility. This liquidity adjustment facility is a window created on the website of the RBI, and the width of the window is decided by the repo rate. Presently, the repo rate is in between. Reverse repo rate is 0.25 percentage point lower than the repo rate. So therefore, in between is the repo rate, and below that is the reverse repo rate. For example, this is the window. This is the window, and in between is the repo rate. Is the repo rate, and this is fixed by the monetary policy. And reverse repo rate is 0.25 percentage point less than this. This is reverse repo rate. Reverse repo rate. This is today the window is 0.255 percentage point, and the MS this is called MSF rate. This is MSF, marginal standing facility rate. This is 0.25% plus. This is plus 0.25 percentage point, and this is minus 0.25 percentage point. So therefore, this width is called the LAF width. This is the liquidity adjustment facility. So therefore, once the repo rate is decided, automatically an MSF rate is fixed and reverse repo rate is fixed. Currently, these are the difference 0.25, 0.25 plus, 0.25 minus in the lower side, and this will determine the width of the LAF. This is called liquidity adjustment facility. And if the bank has already exceeded its limit, that is 1% of their liabilities is fixed by the RBI as a limit, then they have to take the loan at the MSF rate, which is 0.25% higher than the repo rate. When they refund the loan, or when they have any bank has a surplus fund and they want to keep it with the RBI will give them the repo rate minus 0.25 percentage point less than the repo rate, that is reverse repo rate. So therefore, the LAF is decided by the repo rate, and liquidity adjustment facility is the facility through which the banks can approach the RBI for raising the loan to meet their financial requirement at the time of crisis. At the time of crisis, and therefore the monetary policy decision making is very important. Once they decide the repo rate, the other things are automatically decided, and this is how the monetary policy works. And each the MPC committee minutes are published officially after 14 days of the meeting. After 14 days of the meeting, and before 7 days of the meeting, and after 7 days of the meeting is called blackout period, under which none of the members is allowed to meet the press or any person outside the framework of monetary policy committee, and that is called blackout period. 7 days prior to meeting, 7 days after the meeting. And to summarize the monetary policy actions of the government of the RBI, they publish the monetary policy report biannually, 2 times in a year. and in that they summarizes the action taken in the last 6 months as far as monetary policy is concerned. Therefore, monetary policy has become a important policy as far as the controlling of the inflation is concerned. As I mentioned that as the repo rate changes, immediately it doesn't influence the inflation. Immediately it doesn't influence the growth, and therefore there are a time lag between the change in the policy rate and ultimately change in the target, that the inflation rate. Time lag has to be minimized. The time lag is the transfer of the impact of changing the policy rate into the interest rate, lending rate. And once the lending rate has changed, then it will have the impact on the credit demand, and that will have the impact on the inflation. In whole process, there is a time lag. There is a time lag, and time lag may the larger the time lag, more ineffective is the monetary policy. Minimum is the time lag, more effective will be the monetary policy. So therefore, the efforts are that the transmission mechanism of the change in the policy rate has to be faster to have the influence on the target, that is inflation rate. That is inflation rate. As I said, how this monetary policy will work, that one diagram I have included here, which will explain to you how it will work. How it will work. You see that the instrument in the hand of the RBI is the policy rate, which will determine the LAF width also, which will determine the LAF width also. And once the policy rate is changed by the Monetary Policy Committee, it will determine the width of the LAF, and this will policy rate will affect immediately the weighted average of call rate. Weighted average call rate. Weighted average call rate is interbank the interest rate, interbank market interest rate, because banks also give loans to each other for very short-term loans up to 14 days, and they give the loans to each other at the repo rate, fixed by the RBI. For example, today, say Punjab National Bank is needing 5 crore rupees. They may ask the SBI, if they have the surplus fund, they can lend to PNB for maximum 14 days at the repo rate, at the repo rate. And this is called the interbank money market. Interbank money market. Earlier it was called a call market, but today it is called interbank money market. So therefore, uh, the moment the repo rate is changed, the first impact of the repo rate change is the change in the weighted average of call rate. That will immediately change. Interbank money market rate will immediately change, because this is the immediate effect uh, of the change in the repo rate. And once this WACR changes, it will affect the short-term and long-term interest rates. Short-term and long-term interest rate, because WACR is only the rate of interest at which banks are giving loans to each other. But the increase in WACR has to be transmitted into the lending rate of the bank. The rate which banks are charging from the consumers or customers is called the lending rate. And that lending rate should be changed immediately when the interbank money market rate changes. And if that rate changes, it will impact the demand for credit by the consumers and the other customers or business organizations. And that will lead to fall in the demand, and that will be able to control the inflation, price stability. And as I said, the target is to maintain the price stability, keeping in view the growth objective. They cannot uh, uh, they cannot take the measures which will retard the economic growth, which will adversely impact the economic growth. Economic growth has to be kept in view while maintaining the price stability, and therefore This is the channel which is normally followed, in the process, and this is called the transmission mechanism. The day from which the policy rate has changed and the day when the inflation rate will start coming down due to increase in policy rate is the transmission mechanism. How much time it will take to control the inflation or to reduce the inflation by increasing the policy rate. And this whole process is called the transmission mechanism. Transmission mechanism. If the repo rate has changed and ultimately banks have decided not to change the lending rate and they absorb the increase in repo rate in their own bank, then obviously the credit demand will not change. Credit demand will not change, and maybe inflation will not change. So therefore, in the transmission process, at any point of time, the process may be halted, and therefore that is the risk in this process. That is the risk in this process, and therefore it depends upon the efficiency of the transmission mechanism of the monetary policy. How effectively the change in the policy rate will be ultimately translated into lending rate. And if lending rate increases proportionately to change in the policy rate, it will definitely have impact on the aggregate demand, which will finally have the impact on the prices. This is the inflation targeting approach we have adopted. But in some emergency cases or in the cases of the need, the RBI may come out with the different kind of the instruments. For example, in the case of the pandemic crisis and thereafter, the RBI came out with the solution of LTRO and TLTRO. That is the long-term repo operations or targeted long-term repo operations. In this case, long-term repo operation means that RBI is offering the banks that if they take the credit uh, uh, from the RBI today for next 1 month to 3 years, they will only charge the policy rate prevailing today. And for long term, the bank will know the cost of the funds they are raising from the RBI. Today, the loan under LAF is given for 1 to 28 days, and under the LTRO scheme, under the situation of need of raising the demand in the market or raising the credit availability in the market, RBI may also facilitate to increase the credit availability or reducing the cost of availability by taking the steps like LTRO and targeted long-term repo operations. When we say targeted, it means LTRO has been specified for the particular target. For example, the RBI says if you are giving a loan to the consumers or say the particular target group, then the they may charge the different rate from them, and they set the target. Target is set for giving the loan out of this facility to a particular target group, maybe the consumers, maybe the farmers, maybe the business persons, maybe the specified business organizations, maybe the MSME sector. When this target is set for which the LTRO facility is given, it is called targeted long-term repo operations. Therefore, the RBI is not only taking the negative measures to only control the inflation, RBI is also taking some positive steps to push up the availability of credit supply and reduce the cost of credit supply in the time of need when the institutions needed more funds. RBI come up with some innovative schemes to increase the availability of credit and liquidity in the economy. So therefore, the small point here is that when the inflation is there, obviously this kind of the innovative um, the schemes will not be implemented. When inflation is rising and inflation has already crossed the limit of 6%, it touches the 7%, then obviously the RBI has to adopt the tight monetary policy. RBI has to adopt the tight monetary policy. And when the tight monetary policy is adopted, obviously repo rate is increases steeply. And in the last, from the last April onwards till now, the RBI has increased the repo rate by 228 basis points. Repo rate has increased by 2.28 percentage points. 2.28 percentage point. And when policy rate has increased by 2.28 percentage point, it is expected that the lending rate at least will rise by the same amount. And if the lending interest rate rises by 2% or 2.25% or even more than that, it will have definite impact on the credit, the cost of the credit as well as availability of the credit, and which will ultimately impact the credit demand, which will help in controlling the inflation, controlling the inflation. But as I said that it looks very simple and easy that it will happen like this. But in case of the countries like India, the transmission mechanism is not so perfect. It is not fully transmitted. The change in the policy rate is not fully transmitted into the lending rate. If the transmission mechanism is not full, the transmission process is not complete, then obviously the impact on the aggregate demand will be less. And obviously the effectiveness of monetary policy in controlling the inflation will also be less, and the monetary policy will be rendered as ineffective monetary policy. And the effectiveness of the monetary policy will therefore will determined by the speed of monetary transmission. The speed of monetary transmission. The monetary transmission is nothing but the process starting from the change in the policy rate by the central bank to various money market rates such as interbank lending rate, bank deposit rate, bank lending rates to households and the firms, and also the yield on the government and corporate bond and asset prices in the stock market. All these variables have to change by the change in the policy rate. And if the market is smooth, money market is developed, capital market is fully developed, then the transmission mechanism is normally very fast, is very fast. But if the money market is not fully developed or capital market is not fully developed, then the transmission mechanism slows down. And normally it is not necessary that the change in the policy rate is 100% transmitted into the change in the interest rate or lending rate or deposit rate. If it is not 100% transmission, then obviously the impact of change in policy rate will also not be 100% on the goal, that is the targeted inflation. That is the targeted inflation. Normally, the channels through which the monetary policy function is the, as I mentioned, interest rate channel or credit channel, exchange rate channel or asset price channel. When the policy rate changes, all these have to change. Interest rate has to change. Credit has to change. Credit availability has to change. Exchange rate in the market has to change. Asset prices through stock market has to change. Unless these channels become efficient and absorb the change in the policy rate, they will not lead to the change in the lending rates finally. And when lending rate is not changed, then obviously the effect on the inflation will be moderate or meager. Will be moderate or meager. You see that the transmission mechanism has been estimated in few studies. Some of the empirical literature uh, indicate that monetary policy impacts output with a lag of up to 12 months, with a lag of up to 12 months, and inflation with a lag of up to 39 months. It might take the so much time in controlling the inflation through change in the policy rate. If such a long period is there in the transmission lag, then obviously the monetary policy will be less effective, will be less effective. And therefore, the same process I have explained again here, that if policy rate changes, immediate is the short-term money market rate changes. That is, interbank money market rate will change. And when the interbank money market rate will change, it will be the interest rate channel will become active, and through interest rate channel, the bank deposit and lending rate will change. Asset price channel means the in the stock market, the change in the interest rate will change the asset prices. The rising or interest rate will also influence the exchange rate, and rising interest rate will affect the credit demand, and rising interest rate will also change the expectations of the people about the future investment. They may postpone their program for future if they are seeing that interest rate is continuous consistently rising. The business class may postpone their plan for investment, and once these channels become active, their combined effect will be on the consumption demand, investment demand, and the net exports. Because we know that the aggregate demand in any economy is a sum of the consumption demand, sum of investment, private investment demand, sum of the government expenditure, and plus the net exports. Net exports, X minus M. X is exports, M is import. And we have to influence these five variables through the policy rate. If these changes, then aggregate demand will change. And if aggregate demand falls because of change in policy rate, and given the aggregate supply, given AS, then the price may likely to fall. And this is the target of the monetary policy. This is the target of the monetary policy. But as I have said, that the impact of change in policy rate on aggregate demand will have to be transmitted through so many channels. And if the channels are not perfect, are not fully efficient, then the impact of change in policy rate may be stopped or become moderate at any stage. And if becomes moderate or the the it is stopped somewhere, then obviously the landing rate will not change. If landing rate will not change, then the aggregate demand may not be affected completely, and therefore the impact on the price will be moderate. So therefore, the only point we are trying to highlight here is that the of course we have given the power to the RBI to use the any instrument at their disposal to control the inflation. They have also given the target of inflation they have to maintain. That is 2% to 6%. That is the range in which the inflation has to be maintained in the economy. And if the price rises more than 4%, RBI will start taking action for controlling the inflation. But in the last year, as I mentioned, that the inflation has crossed the 6% and touched the 7% in some of the months. And therefore, it was the RBI who has to swung into action immediately to control the inflation, because controlling the inflation is the target given to the RBI. And therefore, only instrument they are using is the policy rate. And therefore, in every MPC meeting, which meets at least 6 times in a year, every 2 months they are meeting, they start raising the policy rate gradually. And in 6 7 months, they raise the policy rate by more than 2 percentage points. And when the policy rate increase by more than 2 percentage points, it is expected that the lending rate, the rate at which the banks give the loan to the consumers and the other customers, is the lending rate. If lending rate rises by 2 percentage points, then obviously the taking loan from the bank become costlier for the consumers or the other customers. and they may postpone their expenditure plan. When they postpone their expenditure plan, the aggregate demand will fall. And when aggregate demand will fall, the price is likely to fall. But whole this process will be true or applicable if the rise in prices is mainly on account of the increase in aggregate demand, because RBI instruments or RBI because whatever they have at their disposal, they will not influence the supply side. They will not influence the supply side. If the increase in prices is mainly on account of the shortage of the goods and services or the increase in the cost of production, then the monetary policy may not be able to control the inflation fully. And that's why the effectiveness of monetary policy lies only when the demand pull inflation is there in the economy. If the demand pull inflation is there in the economy. But we have seen that the prices and the inflation we are experiencing the last 1 year is largely on account of the international factors. Because of the Russian Ukraine conflict, the supply chains disrupted all over, which led to increase in the commodity prices all over the world, especially the price of the crude oil. And we are being the one of the larger importer of the crude oil. 85% of our requirement is met through imports, and therefore we are importing the crude oil at the increased prices, and these increased prices are transmitted in the diesel and petrol prices at the retail level. And when the diesel prices rises, they being the critical input raises the prices in various sectors. They have a large cascading effect across the sectors, and which led to the general rise in prices. And therefore, the rise in prices in case of India was not on account of increase in aggregate demand, but largely on account of the increase in international prices. Therefore, of course, through inflation, we have been able to control the demand, and when demand is controlled, obviously the some impact will be there on the prices. But actual action is required to be taken on the supply side. On the supply side, therefore, the fiscal policy has also important role to play in this regard. And therefore you remember that the government reduces the price of diesel and petrol initially by 1 rupee and then 5 rupees. Now it is stabilized, but the stabilized price of diesel and petrol is quite high, and we are lucky that the international prices of crude oil is also stabilized. Otherwise we would not have been able to control the inflation. Therefore, using the combination of fiscal and monetary policy, we are able to control the inflation. And inflation was brought within 6% by December 2022. It was around 5.8, 5.9%. But still, the 5.8, 5.9 is much more than the 4%, which is considered to be creeping inflation in our case. Therefore, the RBI still have to continue to adopt a policy to control the inflation. You see that in the last two meetings of the MPC, the repo rate has not been changed because the RBI realized that the supply side is almost stabilized, international prices are stabilized, and therefore they have not changed the repo rate. Repo rate is still is at the level at which they decided in February. And therefore, the repo rate has been the important instrument in the hands of monetary policy to control the inflation. But for fiscal policy side, if they really want to help in controlling the inflation, is to control the fiscal deficit or public expenditure. If they are not able to control the fiscal deficit, if fiscal deficit is very high, then the government will raise the market borrowings in the market. Market borrowings will be raised. When government enters into the market, to borrow the money. They borrow in bulk. They borrow in bulk. And as a result, the yield on the government securities start falling. Interest rate start rising in the market. Therefore, if fiscal deficit is high, government is placing huge demand of funds in the local market. The interest rate start rising. Interest rate start rising, and the RBI policies also want interest rate to rise, and therefore the interest rate has risen recently by almost 2 percentage point. 2 percentage point. That was because of the coordinated efforts by the monetary and fiscal policy. And this increase in the lending rate has some impact on the aggregate demand, on aggregate demand. But as I said, in case of India, the main problem is not of the aggregate demand. The problem is the structural constraint in the economy. And one of these structural constraints is that the over dependence on the international market for the critical input like crude oil. We are depending upon them. And if their prices rises, it is imported in our domestic economy, and the general prices start rising after some time. And this is how the inflation need to be controlled. It is not only monetary policy, the fiscal policy, and if in some of the sector supply has become the constraint, then the sectoral policy is also becoming important to control the prices. So therefore, the controlling the prices, of course, we have given the target to RBI, but still a effective coordination is required between the RBI and the government to control the prices, to control the prices. And we have seen this kind of coordination in the recent past when we are able to have a dent on the prices. Of course, the the major role of the stability in prices is because of the stability of the crude oil prices in the international market, or fall in the crude oil prices in the international market, which has helped us in controlling the inflation. But given this whole background, still we have to believe that the monetary policy framework which we have developed have a significant role in controlling the prices in our economy. And therefore we need to understand the nuances or the processes through which the monetary policy uh, um, try to control the inflation. And we need to understand this transmission process very clearly. And if the transmission process halts at any point of time, it may halt the process of controlling the inflation. And therefore, the RBI has to take all possible measures to identify the points where the transmission process either halted or slowed down, and take the necessary measures to make the transmission process as fast as possible. Normally, the various empirical studies has implemented that the transmission process in India is hardly 50 to 53%. It means if policy rate has changed by 1 percentage point, the landing rate only changes by zero point 0.5 or 0.52 percentage point. This is the time. This is the impact. It means the transmission process is not fully complete, and therefore the transmission process halts at any point in between the change in the policy rate and change in the landing rate. That has to be plugged, and RBI has already taken various measures for plugging all these points, which I am not covering today, but maybe in some other class I'll cover in detail which are the areas where the impact of policy rate is halted and not transmitted fully in the landing rate, and what action, what measures the RBI has taken to make the transmission process more effective, more smooth. That maybe that is a point of discussion under monetary policy. But today I have taken the monetary policy only to the extent it is responsible for controlling the inflation. And I hope that through this presentation, we have given you enough material to to go through and read about the what inflation is, what are the causes of inflation generally, what are the impact of inflation generally, what are the normal instruments used for controlling the inflation, and what measures RBI uses to control the inflation, and how far RBI is able to control the inflation. All these issues we have discussed in today's lecture, and I hope that you will get the enough material to read through it and enough material for the preliminary examination. Thank you very much, and I end the class here, and I again see you in the next class with a new topic. Thank you very much.